This is David Cooper. The date is 2nd of June, and excuse me. The date is 2nd of June, and the case number 1999730. We were recently gifted 2 VHS cassettes. There were no labels on them. The sender is currently anonymous, but we're looking into that. Listening to the first few seconds, I recognized 2 voices, one from RHETT Gardner and the other being Beck O'Connor, both reported missing. The time of recording is unknown. They were recording for their horror-based podcast, The Nightmares. Judging by its contents, there's little to no evidence on their disappearance. There was no video alongside these recordings. I will make my own digital recordings of these tapes to archive and perhaps look deeper into what really happened. Hope we can find them, and may God be with them.
And good evening. Welcome to The Nightmares. I'm Rick Gardner.
And I'm Becca Connor.
And it's a very humid day in England. Who would have thought it? Straight out of a fairy tale, that. Yeah, so I don't know about you on your end, but I feel like a wax model in the desert right now, just completely melting away.
No, we've had sunshine in Ireland, but yeah.
Oh, there you go. Yeah, at least we get it. Well, this is funny because I'm sure a lot of our listeners are going to be mainly British-based for now, but you know, we tend to complain at any sort of changing of season. So, you know, it's when it's been like winter, it's like, oh, when's it going to be summer? And then summer comes around, it's like, oh, I really want to build a snowman, but there's no snow. It's like, well, just can't be happy. So have you been on? So we took a month off. Yeah, that'd be great. Yeah, a couple of weeks. So have you been in the couple of weeks, B?
I've been alright. It's been a hectic couple of weeks. Lots of work and things to do, and I've been watching some horror movies, which we'll be discussing.
Oh yeah,
How have you been?
did I. Yeah, I've been watching the exact same ones. As a matter of fact, B, I've actually, because there's so we do have a theme to go on for the next 2 episodes. In fact, this is going to be a 2-parter. Just because of the subject matter, we need to give it more time, and also it's just easier to edit a 2-parter than to edit like a massive thing, and it's easier to listen to.
A 2-parter for now.
What's that? Sorry.
A 2-parter for now. I
think,
for
now.
There's so much content here for us to discuss. We're going to start with 2 parts, and then maybe later on down the line, who knows?
Yeah, it'll be like follow-ups for like the previous episodes. So yeah, I think like last week or so, because now cinemas are open again, at least in the UK. So I went to my local Everyman, and I happened to catch Spiral, which I didn't actually know existed until the day before. It's the new installment of the Saw series, which I'm sure we'll probably come across that in the podcast sooner or later. Now, I've been a massive Saw fan, the very original, which I believe was released in 2004, and the second one wasn't too bad. Anything following that is just kind of more of a novelty value. I just kind of watch it mainly to see if the traps that were made for that film were any good. So Spiral is the latest edition, and for whatever reason, I'm still trying to wrap my head around this. They actually featured Chris Rock, who is a very popular comedian. They billed him as the main lead for this horror film, and not only that, if it doesn't get any weirder than that, they had Samuel L. Jackson filming that as well. And if you told me back in 2004 when this film came out that Chris Rock and Samuel L. Jackson were going to be in a horror movie together, I would laugh in your face and say, no, that is ridiculous. That is perhaps the most profound thing I've ever heard in my life, and it's never going to happen. And, well, like several years later, truth is... it's just sometimes the truth is stranger than fiction. But yeah, the main story is, I'm sure you know about Jigsaw. Basically, he's like this guy who makes traps for like those who've committed some sort of crime in their life or did an evil deed, and the traps are kind of based around what they've done in a way. Some of the traps in the film are probably what is the main attraction for the films to go see them, and some of them could be really creative. So the premise in this one is Chris Rock is a lead detective for a police department and his father, played by Samuel Jackson, used to be the main chief. So basically what happens is the certain police members get picked off one by the new incarnation of Jigsaw. And eventually over time he starts to realise that the killings link with himself and things that's happened in the police force in the past, so it's all kind of connected. And I think the point of the film is to show the police corruption just corruption in the police force entirely. I don't want to go into it too much. I just want to do kind of like bullet points. Chris Rock should never ever be in a horror film because he's a good... I mean, he's an okay comedian, don't get me wrong, he's a good comedian, and the only films I've ever seen him is a comedy where you don't have to act as much, but if you're funny, you can, it's passable. But the problem is he doesn't have that intensity that the character required. So this guy had like a lot riding on his shoulders because his old man is like a legend in his precinct, and he's dealing with a lot of turmoil as his police members, like his police buddies, get picked off one by one. Like the way he has little breakdowns here and there where he can't take the strain, and he looks like a child having a tantrum. You know what I mean? The acting is so poor. I reckon if Chris Rock, to be fair, I don't think he's ever done like a serious role before, at least as far as I'm aware. This is probably the most serious thing he's ever done, and it really shows. Like he kind of that sort of intensity that he needed was just not there. He was kind of withering under the lights a little bit. Samuel Jackson was just there. I don't know. In fact, there was a lot of like Tarantino influences in that film, so that's probably where they got it from. Chris Rock he needs acting lessons or something. He can't. He just couldn't fit the bill, and I think they just did it because they wanted. I won't go into that, but they just wanted someone like Chris Rock to be in that film, and Samuel Jackson as well. All right, and the traps were mediocre at best. They're a bit gory, but you kind of get bored of that after a while. Or at least be a little bit creative. The guy who plays Jigsaw, I won't go too much into spoilers, but he was probably like really lame, and he didn't like. The thing with Jigsaw is he was at least sort of fair, and he did kind of have a very good background as to why he does what he does, and a lot of the traps were a bit more, I guess like his early traps were like very sort of smart in a way, I suppose. But yeah, I just didn't really relate to this Jigsaw at all. He was probably like the worst of the bunch. But it's a good novelty thing. I mean, if you haven't been to the cinema in a long time, then it's still worth watching. But I would say it's one of the weaker ones. Um, so it's called Spiral, which is meant to be like a symbol of change, which is the point of the whole thing. So like to change the police department and stuff like that. For me, it was just a downward spiral, and I could only wish I was. It's like getting caught in a whirlpool, and you just keep getting deeper and deeper, and you just want to get out. So that's what that
Yeah.
film was for me. Yeah. So and now that's out of the way, we can actually talk about what we're here to talk about. And I'm
Mm.
very excited about this. I think we've mentioned this in previous episodes. Is the found footage horror films. So, for those who don't know, so it's found footage is more of a film technique, and you can see it outside of horror, like District 9, for example, is famously used that. So the way that it works is that, well, I mean, a lot of the times it's going to be like mockumentaries or pseudo documentaries that have like footage that was found by someone and they edited it to form a narrative. So, say for example, there was this team that went to go investigate these ancient caves, and they even made it out. So they send another team in, and they found some tapes, and they look into what happened to that crew. That's the kind of premise, the kind of formula that you see in a found footage film. And sometimes you'll find that oh, pardon me. So you'll
Mhm.
find that a lot of the acting can be improvised as well, and there's a lot of moments where the actors don't know what's actually going on as well to add to that sort of realism. And I think that's why it became so much more popular as a genre as time went on. In fact, we're going to talk about the most popular one in this particular episode as well. That kind of brought it forth into the spotlight a little bit. But what I thought I'd do is because I thought these would be interesting films to mention is actually where the beginnings of the found footage genre kind of came to be. In fact, you could even go back so far back as novels, for example, like Frankenstein and Dracula. Those were like letters that someone else
Yeah.
written. So that's like the literary version of found footage. I can't remember the names of those types of novels, but those are like the you could go far back as that if you wish. But in terms of films, there's two that I particularly want to bring up because I've seen them at some point in my life. Is the very is Hannibal Holocaust
Right.
and Guinea Pig 2. So Cannibal Holocaust came out in 1980, at the beginning of the 80s, just before the sort of slasher films became more prominent. And it was directed by Ruggero Deodato. Apologies if I did get the surname wrong. And it is an Italian cannibal movie where the premise was a film crew, and this is all paraphrasing. This is because I've seen this film before, so I'm just basing it on the last time I saw it. So basically, a film crew's interviewing and filming a cannibal tribe in some part of the world, and they went missing. So a second film came to find the whereabouts of the crew, and also they found the footage that we use in the film. So what they did is they went back through the footage to see what happened and what went on. So that was the beginning of the found footage genre, and already it's already interesting as a premise because the events have already happened. You're already looking back to see what's happened on those tapes. Like I'm sure in real life, if you found some abandoned tapes or somewhere, you would want to know what's on there. It's the curiosity. That
I don't think so. After watching the movies we've watched in the last couple of weeks, I really don't think so. I think I'm put
if
off that for life.
if there was but then there's weird people like myself like who would absolutely dive into that sort of thing like abandoned footage. Hell yeah, let's get a VCR and check it out and see what's going on. um
I don't know.
so the thing about Cannibal Holocaust is it's probably one of the most controversial horror films ever made. and it's been banned in well over 50 countries in terms of distribution. So like over a decade ago, I had a friend who for somehow managed to get a copy of it on DVD. So I've
Oh
actually
boy.
seen the film, which is pretty nuts if you think about it. And if I'm being completely honest, um, it's going to be hard to watch, so I actually wouldn't recommend it. Just noting it down the podcast as a historical reference. The reason why is because there is actual animal cruelty in the film, unfortunately, which I don't condone. And it's at first I didn't realize it was real at first, and then I kind of did some research, and it turns out that a lot of the animals were mutilated and killed in that film, which is it's pretty hectic. So if you're like me, if you're kind of an animal lover, I seriously wouldn't watch this film unless you're with someone um, who can support you through that. But honestly, I would just give that one a miss. You could probably find certain scenes of it. Um, if you want to see the kind of level of horror that it was without seeing the actual cruel bits, then by all means go ahead. But yeah, there's a lot of animal cruelty in that, unfortunately. And there was a lot of controversy about the film itself, where people actually believed it was a snuff film.
That doesn't
And
surprise me, given the content of the film. That doesn't surprise me at all.
yeah, already, yeah. So because there was a lot of mutilation on the actors. For one example, towards the when we watched sort of the end of the footage, like the remaining survivors were caught in like a sort of like the cannibal tribe, and they had like huddled around this one dude, and they like severed his penis off, and you can see it on the film. It's pretty grim, you know. Yeah, stuff like that. I mean, so they the theory of it being a snuff film, it went so far as to have the films confiscated, and legal action was taken on the director, who had to convince the court that it was, not real. In fact, the actors who starred in that film signed a contract to not appear in any media or any press for about a year to make it more believable. But it got to the point where he was on a brink of getting a sentence, so he got someone to film to call the actors and have them on like Italian television, like live television, just to say that they're alive and they're okay. But there is a lot of really realistic human killings in that. In fact, one of the most iconic images, like you see it on like DVD cover and posters and stuff, is a woman who's like impaled on a spike, but from the rear up to her mouth, and like the spike sort of comes out of her throat. It's pretty grim. They did explain how they did that. I mean, none of the human killings were real in that film. They later found out. But that movie is very, very intense in terms of how grotesque and gratuitous some of the cruelty was. But again, I'm sure you can find it out there if you really feel like you need to watch it to see how found footage really began. By all means, that's up to you. I personally, I would say you can give that one a miss. There's a lot of horror films that are just as scary and doesn't affect any living creatures in any way.
I feel like on a psychological level as well, to watch it, that would be immensely intense. Like,
Yeah,
I'm not going to
it
pretend
was
I've seen Cannibal Holocaust. I don't think it's going to be one of the ones that I do see. But I feel like psychologically, after watching that, you probably feel affected in some ways, shapes, and forms.
yeah, it was especially to find out that the animal killings were real afterwards. Yeah, that shook me a little bit. And I haven't seen that film since, and I don't intend on ever watching it ever again. But I just thought, again, these are the origins of horror. We have to go through this. I'll bring it
Well,
up.
this is kind of a defining film for what created found footage in the beginning.
Yeah,
So
this is basically a blueprint of which subsequent films followed, whether directly or indirectly. So they kind of Ruggero basically directed. He paved the way basically for other filmmakers in the found footage genre. And a little bit of trivia as well. If you remember the Hostel movies, directed by Eli Roth,
yeah.
he made a guest appearance in the first one as a guy who's like eating a woman, like, but it was like fine dining, so she was like laid out on a table with like fruit and everything, and he was just kind of eating the muscles of her leg.
You know what? I actually found there's an interview quote here that I found, and it's of him basically saying how you would prepare a body for eating. It's like, oh, he's never done it before, but yeah.
Oh, okay. We should definitely link that in. I mean, the actual controversy and everything, like during and after the film, I highly recommend reading, because it's really interesting how far it went, and it's amazing. Like, because don't forget, these kind of films didn't really exist back then. So when you see a film like that in the cinema, you think it's real. Like nowadays, we've seen enough films to be desensitized and led to believe it's all fake because it's all Hollywood, just all all that stuff. But back then, like if you've never seen a horror film like this before and you watch it in a cinema with a massive screen, you watch some dude's dick getting cut off on a massive screen, that will haunt you for days, I reckon.
Oh, boy.
If not for the rest of the life. Yeah, oh boy, indeed.
It's like some dark web stuff right there.
It is, yeah. Before the dark web ever came out, it's the dark screen.
They had Cannibal Holocaust.
Yeah. So for me, that's the only time I'm ever going to bring that film up, to be honest. And I'm sure you can, if you read about it, if you ever did see it, if you're brave enough to see it, you'll see why. So
I'm going to say this now. I'm never going to be brave enough to see that.
No.
Like I said, I had to pause like 100 times just watching the Poughkeepsie tapes.
Oh yeah, and
I'm probably not going to watch Cannibal Holocaust.
Yeah, I know. No, oh god. But I'm more happy to talk about the Poughkeepsie tapes, which we will.
We will get to that later on. Yeah.
Ooh. So the second film is a Japanese horror film made in 1985 called Guinea Pig 2: Flower of Flesh and Blood. So that's by Hideshi Hino. So this is the sequel of the first one, of course, and I've only seen this once, a very long time ago, probably around the same time as Cannibal Holocaust. So the film is, and it's kind of got the found footage thing again. So the film's plot is concerning like a man who's dressed as a samurai, who drugs and kidnaps a woman, ties her to a bed and just like starts dismembering her and then adding like parts of her body as part of a collection of previous victims. It's a very I know it's a very dark beginning to the found footage genre.
I'm really glad that you decided to do the intro to all this stuff, because this is carry on. This is effective.
Yeah.
Stuff.
And I'm so elated with joy that I'm doing it as well. But the sooner I talk about it, the sooner we can move on. So this is a very short film. It's only 42 minutes. Again, this is another film. This is 5 years apart from Cannibal Holocaust, where, again, it's more violence based, very gory. There was another infamous, although I believe that this has also been debunked as well. So the actor Charlie Sheen met with a film critic called Chris Gore, who gave him a copy of it, and upon watching it, Sheen believed, he was convinced it was a snuff film, and apparently the Federal Bureau of Investigation made an inquiry as to the film and the contents involved in it, and they spoke to the distribution company, the guy called Charles Balin, who was an early distributor of that film in the States, I believe. And of course, once they've seen the making of documentary, the theories were debunked. But I think that even that is an urban legend nowadays. So I thought I'd bring that up now because I don't want people listening in and saying, actually, that was actually disproven. I know that. I just thought it was an interesting bit of, like, it just shows. But again, back in the day, like, there wasn't many films like this. You know what I mean? That, unless it was a genuine snuff film, which people seem to have known about at that point. So these films, although very as early back as the early 80s, did have a major impact, and it just showed the capabilities of found footage and how real and how raw it can be. So weirdly enough, so from 85 onwards, there was a few random films here and there that I personally haven't seen, so I can't really talk about. So there was a few. Then there wasn't even so many horror films as such.
No,
But
found
now,
footage kind of permeates all genres these days, which is really
oh,
interesting considering its origin.
oh yeah, if you look on the list, like if you go on Wikipedia, there's a really good list of, like, chronological list of all the films that have that sort of technique. And if you look at the later years, which we'll eventually go into, it just boomed at that point. But if you look back at the beginning, there was Cannibal Holocaust in 1980, Guinea Pig 2, Flower and Flesh and Blood in 1985, and there was a few films here and there in the late to so late 80s to late 90s. But then
Blair Witch, I think, is the next
Blair
one.
Witch Project, yes, you're absolutely right. In 1999, the perhaps one of the highest grossing horror films of all time, the Blair Witch Project, was released in 1999. Originally part of the Sundance Film Festival, and then eventually it flourished in cinemas throughout the world, and the box office gross was nearly 250 million. And what's funny about it is it was actually less gory than any of the found horror footage that we've talked about and anything leading up to this film. And it was an independent movie as well. So it was Daniel Myrick and Eduardo Sanchez. They were both directors and writers of this. And the premise was three filmmakers in 1994 wanted to make a documentary about the famous Blair Witch, which was basically like a folklore in Burkittsville, Maryland. And I think it ties in with also various other folklore legends as well that happened from the late 19th century onwards. So these three filmmakers, student filmmakers, decide to explore the woods in which the Blair Witch folklore sort of began. And over a period of time, they become lost. They become distraught and on the verge of losing their sanity throughout the whole film. And then, of course, there are sightings and also weird occurrences that happen throughout their stay in the forest. And, well, you can, I'm sure you can get it from here. Things don't get any better for these guys, like, once they set foot in that forest. I'll put it that way. But this film... Yeah, sorry?
I was going to say, I've heard a lot of interesting theories about what the ending of that film was about, and how, obviously, there wasn't anything supernatural to it, and it could have just been a big murder cover-up. But
it could have been... There's a lot of... there's a lot of theories. All varied, all very interesting. As a matter of fact, my experience for this film, I never actually watched the film first. So there was an accompanying book that was published about the Blair Witch film, yeah. But it was so it ties in with the film. So it's kind of like after the footage was found, and they talk. A lot of the book had like interviews and just various files and things in relation to the Blair Witch, and anything that happened kind of within that area of Maryland. So that as a kid, I read that, and obviously as a kid, you believe anything, don't you? So when I read that, I thought, man, this sounds like really awesome. Like this sounds like really real. And then when you watch the film, which I did eventually, it was yeah, like it really stood out to me, because the way they made that movie and how they went about it, it was, you know, it was pretty gripping, and it was very, like, it was just so authentic. And you'll find that with the Blair Witch Project, although this wasn't the first to use the technique, the found footage technique, this I think this is the most integral film, the most important landmark, even more than the first two films that we've mentioned, because although they made the blueprints, I think the Blair Witch Project updated those blueprints on how scary and how small budget the genre can be and still be a hit. So one of the most interesting things about this film, and you'll find with the future films that we talk about, has the similar sort of portrayal of the genre. For example, there is hardly any gore in this film. There is probably, out of the whole film, 5% of it might be violent in a way. And it's just so minimalist. Where you see like slasher films, for example, there's probably like they probably lose gallons of blood whilst, you know, making the movie, like just tons of it. In this film, there's only a speck of blood, really, like as much as you can see, and this film is terrifying.
Yeah.
You know, and I think the reason why like it was so scary, because of the believability, that you feel like these people were really in that situation, and how much they were willing to keep up the magic of this being real. So for example, the three actors, who actually the main characters are named after the actors, so that's Heather, Donahue, Mike and Josh, right? They were actually out in the woods, and they just had to stay out there during filming. And a lot of the times they hardly met the crew. They had no connection with the director other than like a walkie-talkie if they need to use it. And and if they do get seriously lost, they can call that, or I think they had like a GPS or something, the 90s equivalent of a GPS tracker. But most of the time, they were just out on their own. And one of the main appeals of this film as well is like the sort of the breakdown of compatibility with the three filmmakers. Of course, as they're getting lost, it's not just the Blair Witch that they find terrifying. It's the fact also it's just that they're kind of breaking down around each other. I mean, if you watch the beginning of the film, they're like, I think Mike was actually a recent addition. They never met him before, but they all became really good friends at the beginning, like in the first day of filming. And then when they go out to the woods and these things start happening, they start getting.
It's interesting how easily they lose their grip.
Very.
Like, it kind of adds to the tension, and I know what you said, where it adds to this fear that they are very much involved in whatever they're in. It's not a removed thing. We're not viewing it from like a third person or looking into someone else's world. We're viewing it from their perspective with the camera. And the idea that it very quickly devolves into turn the camera off. We have to try and get back to where we were. It's kind of telling.
Yeah, that's another thing too, because obviously at the end of the day, it wasn't real. They're making a movie, but there was a lot of times where they like turn it off. It just seemed really believable. Yeah, that's a good point as well. Um, Another thing that I find there's a lot of the trivia and behind the scenes actually really gives you an idea of what they were actually going through in real life. For example, the only way they could get food is through film crew or the director, and the director shortened their rations each day to heighten the tension between the actors.
Oh boy, that's
Yeah,
so. You couldn't do that now. It's kind of inhumane, because it's
yeah,
playing on their chemical makeup in order to get them to react more to think to things. They use that tactic in other senses of training, but it it
it's
does kind of add an extra layer to like your kind of human rights aspect, kind of like with things with obviously not in the same magnitude as what we've spoken about already.
yeah. I mean, no, exactly. So, yeah. Although that may, I mean, to me, like, I guess the thing with directors and um, is that they have to, they get their ideas across one way or another, and that's why, yeah. I mean, directors are real dickheads when you think about it. It's like the guy who made The Revenant. You know
Mm.
what I mean? Like that guy, he was like really, really cruel and put his actors through really harsh conditions just to get the film that he
Yeah.
wanted. And it's the same application here as well. Like these guys were completely cut off. The rations were lessening every day. A lot of the stuff that they probably got on camera was probably genuine, because at the end of the day, the majority of the film is just them in the woods.
Yeah.
So yeah, they were stranded out there, and they had to camp out there as well. They didn't have like trailers that they could go to after the filming was done. I believe they had to sleep out there.
Yeah.
They did get lost in real life.
It's
Um,
intense dedication to a role. Like,
God, yeah. I mean,
yeah.
if this was, yeah, the thing is though, I don't think this would have happened with like an A-list cast. To be honest with
No,
you.
no, no, not in the slightest. You see that with a lot of things though as well. Very often you have like a very small group of passionate people making something that they don't think is going to get very far, but because they're passionate about it, and
Mm.
maybe they don't have the same experience as someone on an A-list cast does, they get this mindset of we will do whatever we can to make this succeed. So that's probably why there was a sense of, we're not going to give up. Yes, the working conditions are utter shit, but there is a passion and a
Yeah,
project there, especially in how they embodied their roles.
that's correct. Yeah, I mean, in fact, like during the auditions, they were asked some very like pretty intense questions. Like, I think Heather Donahue, she was asked like as if it was like a prison parole, like like why should we like let you get out of prison? Like, why should you you like why should we take like 3 years off your sentence to do parole to get out and stuff like that? And they had to answer.
Yeah.
It was to see what they could do in the moment, basically, because a lot of the stuff that we see in the film has probably just happened in that moment.
It's probably
Um,
just thrown at them without much
yeah,
prep.
exactly. And what's really fascinating to me as well is apparently they had like 20 hours of raw footage. The original cut was 2.5 hours,
Mm.
and it took 8 months to edit. So I don't know. I've never owned a DVD of this or a Blu-ray, but I hope there's some raw footage in there because there's probably some really good acting that we probably won't
We
see.
don't even get to see, yeah.
Yeah, and what else? So okay, so there's the believing, like to make it as real as possible. So that's one aspect. Another aspect is again the minimalism used. So the crew had two cameras, a DAT and like an actual film camera. So one was to do the behind the scenes, one's to do the real footage, and of
Yeah.
course
The
the film
Discam
was
as well.
interspliced. Yeah. So a lot of the time they're in the dark,
Yeah.
and they film the dark. And I don't know about you, like back in these days, I found that really terrifying.
I still find that fairly terrifying.
Yeah, I know you do. Yeah, but someone mentioned because with digital stuff as well, like you could see everything. Everything's all like high definition and things like that. But like the thing about horror, right, is what we don't see.
Very much so, yeah.
Yeah, so like HD films nowadays, it's like when you play a video game and you turn the brightness all the way up and you can see everything. It's like, well, that's not going to scare you, is it? Like you completely diminish the atmosphere.
Yeah.
And I find that with some horror films, even in like some of the older ones, like before Blair Witch, I can't give you an example, but Scary Movie did a parody of it where someone would be in a dark room, turn a candle on, like light a candle, and then it looks like floodlights have come on, and it illuminates the entire room.
Yeah.
That happens in horror quite a bit. Yeah,
it happens in a lot of movies, and it kind of breaks the immersion. Not even just like in horror, if you look at other genres as well. As soon as they have that, oh, there's a candle on, one candle, but we can see everything in the room. It removes all sense of tension from a scene. It removes the mystery from it as well, and it can kind of destroy a scene.
Yeah, I mean, it's just basically it then looks like a film set.
It very much does. Yeah.
Yeah, it ruins that immersion, like you said. So when they're in the tent, for example, and like they're moving the camera around, it's nerve-wracking because they pan it so quickly. And for example, if they're in the forest, like every time they pan a camera, in your mind, I don't know, I can't speak for you guys, but for me, like I feel like something's going to be there. Like I'm just preparing myself. Like every time the camera pans, like it moves, or jolts in some way, I'm expecting the worst to happen, and that keeps me on edge because it's constantly rotating, and it's just really, really, really scary. Like for example, they're in a tent and they can hear children laughing, which is probably one of the scariest parts of the film, and then the tent starts like ruffling, like shaking, like and they're like, oh my god, get out, get the fuck out, and they start running out, and like because the guy's running, like it's like shaking the camera as well, so it's like not completely fixed, which makes it even more terrifying because you don't know what you're going to see.
I'm going to be honest, it just makes me nauseous most of the time when that
happens. Exactly, so it makes you sick as well, but in a way that could benefit you in terms of experience. It
definitely adds something to the experience. It creates a very like unnerving and unsettled feeling, so.
And again, going back to the believability, like they didn't know that was going to happen. In fact, the director was the one who shook the tent. They had no idea what was going on, so their reactions are real,
100% organic.
And for example, one of the moments, again, something they didn't notice before is when Heather was running in front of either Josh or Mike, she turns to the left and says, oh my god, what the fuck is that? It was a woman in a white gown just hanging out in the woods. That bit I don't know if they know, but that was supposed to be the Blair Witch, and that was meant to be the only time we're ever meant to see her, but the cameraman forgot to pan that way and we never saw him, and they never reshot it.
I kind of like that
best.
though.
Yeah, I like that too. Yeah, I like that the mistake actually benefited the film because we never see the Blair Witch. And that's another thing. That's even more scary. I mean, we know what she's supposed to look like. Because there's this one kooky old lady that apparently seen her, described what she looked like, which was really bizarre. It was like she was just all hairy all around, and for example, it's really bizarre. But so you have an idea in your head and you can imagine it for yourself, which is even better because I feel like it's like with books, like you can use your imagination to cobble up what they look like, and in the film you can use your own interpretation of what the Blair Witch looks like. I mean, they give you an idea just to make it scary, but then you can think it in your head, like you can envision them behind these people or just lurking around in the forest, waiting for them to drop their guard,
I feel like as well the imagination factor that found footage creates, in where you have gaps in what you can see. Sometimes your own imagination is scarier than anything a director can put on the screen. Because if you don't see something and you just hear something, your head does like 90% of the work on creating this intense, terrifying scenario.
Yeah, exactly. And like that's why I think like although not every film can pull this off, but yeah, like the minimalist approach is so much better for the imagination and for your brain to work things out, because your brain obviously is going to try and figure out things that you can't see or don't understand, and that's where the fears kind of plays its role. And that's why the film at its time did so tremendously well, I think, because it did nothing that horror has done in that time, at least not recently. And not to mention as well, like even after the film, like the marketing, like they had like missing posters for the for the cast.
Yeah.
And because they used their real names, like people thought it was real. Like Heather's mum kept getting letters and people from fans and family, like wishing condolence on the daughter's death, and it's like, no, she's fine.
Yeah, that's one of the really clever things that most of them have done. Like looking at everything that's here. I know you were saying about Cannibal Holocaust, where they had the where none of the actors were allowed to appear on film or on any recording. And then you also had, with Guinea Pig 2, no one was allowed. Oh, no one was allowed. It was released as a proper snuff film. That's how it was advertised at first.
Yeah.
So of course anyone coming into contact with it thought that it was a real snuff film that had just been released to the public as a horror film. So the director of Guinea Pig 2, Hideshi Hino, was actually like arrested for murder as part of that, until he could prove otherwise. Which is really interesting. It creates this really intense, immersive scenario that people have to face and deal with, uncomfortably so, until you kind of know what's happening.
And I think if this film was made now, I don't think it would have had a bigger impact. I think it just came out at the right time. And they did have a website as well, which I completely forgot about. They made like a website to have like photos and materials of the actors and stuff like that, and about like it's kind of like it's like that book I was talking about, but on a website. It's like a dossier of various things, and that apparently got like 160 million hits, that website, within that year.
Insane.
Yeah, so this isn't in total now, leading up to now. That was just in that year alone. And I think that was leading up to the film as well, or during the film's release. It was actually one of the early instances of like viral marketing as well, before such a thing even existed as well. So it wasn't just the film and how they chose to do the film, it was also the marketing approach, which again, it'll be very difficult to do nowadays, because it's really hard to
stay off the grid for that long. I think it'd be insanely difficult.
It'd be impossible.
With social media and everything that's in play, and the expectations of actors in other media as well, it would be impossible.
It would be impossible. I'm sure you could do it, but it would be near impossible now. Because not only that, like people have access to social media as well, and if they see, like, say an actor died and apparently they're trying to make it out as real, someone could see them walking down the street and just post it on social media, for example, and then it's already gone. Like, the illusion is already dead. So this film is very special, just for the time that it was in and what they were set out to do. it was completely the exact opposite of kind of the gore that you would see in most horror films, and it's absolutely astounding what it's done. And to me, that's the true found footage film. In terms of quality, there's probably maybe like one or two that I think would kind of contend with it, and we're going to be talking about those films. What was really good, what was really like, this film has had such an impact that there was a lot of people, like fans and occultists alike, you know, they actually travelled to that town where it was filmed, and they believed it was real.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So there was a lot of, like, that place got some heavy traffic of these nutters who just stayed there and tried to get a glimpse of the Blair Witch and stuff like that. Like, it was such a huge ordeal. In fact, this film had a sequel, which was, I'll be completely honest with you, it's absolutely terrible. In fact,
Yeah.
as a matter of fact, I think I saw this film before the actual first one, so I kind of messed up a little bit there. But I was a kid, what do I know? But yeah, the second film was based on the events leading up to after the first one, where it's basically like hardcore fans of the film and people who believed it was real went out to that very same forest, and the Blair Witch had their way with them. That movie was nowhere near as good. You're more than welcome to try and watch it. I have no idea if that's even on Netflix anymore. It was before.
I don't think it is at the moment.
Oh, well, lucky you guys. It's just don't. If honestly, don't bother. But if you're really, really that desperate to watch a film, I mean, it's better than watching a Cannibal Holocaust anyway. I'll put it that way. But in terms, yeah. So this film paved the way for a lot of films that we're going to be talking about in the next part. Was there anything additional that you would like to add to this at all?
I don't think so. I'm going to be honest. I think I've said everything as we've gone along. Found footage obviously has an immensely profound effect on horror as a genre, because even for horror films that don't fit the genre entirely, there is always not always, but there are several examples of like calling back to it, and it kind of calls back in every other genre that there is there, especially when you look at like your detective shows, murder mysteries, things like that. So while Cannibal Holocaust probably wasn't the best film out, it definitely wasn't, just based on its kind of more intense starting points and the apparent animal cruelty and human rights or lack thereof. It's definitely had a profound impact on every genre out there. That's kind of the only observation I have of it as a whole, in that no matter where you go, it's permeated everything.
I mean, I, as much as I don't like that film anymore, like, over time, yeah, that was, of course, that was the roots, which then grew to bring forth other films that, you know, do deserve the credibility that it has, and like I said, for me, the Blair Witch Project is the true definition of a found footage horror film.
Yeah.
And any filmmaker that wishes to pursue that sort of genre should just watch the Blair Witch Project. It basically tells you everything that you need to make your own film. I mean, you can always do your own original idea. There's nothing obviously wrong with that, but to get what makes it scary and what makes it horrifying is the reason you should at least watch that. Okay, so I guess we're wrapping this up a little bit shorter than usual, but this concludes part one of the found footage double headers. So the second part will skip forward in a couple of years, and we'll be talking about the more modern found footage films, but two in particular that, you know, may not have been talked about as much, but I feel is probably one of the more powerful films out of the recent interpretations of the genre. But until then, thank you for listening as always. We do appreciate it. And we expect to see you again next week.
See you next week.
Thank you.